Today is Landon Blake, and Landon is a land surveyor who lives and works in the California Central Valley. He's licensed in California and Nevada. He's also a certified federal surveyor, and he's a UAV pilot. Landon owns Redefined Horizons, which is a family-owned surveying business focused on small private land development projects and real estate transactions in the Central California and Western Nevada. He enjoys hiking, landscape photography, computer programming. He lives with his wife, Monique, and his foster son, Marty, and his 3 dogs in Stockton. So I asked him for his books options as well, and we'll talk about those at the end. So
all right.
Thank you, Landon. Thanks for being on.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me. I was super excited to find out about this. I think surveyors need to do more of this stuff. So I was, I'll just share with the group up front that when I was learning to be a surveyor, I was really starved for information like this. I spent a lot of time on the CLSA forum and on the, I think it was the POB forum, I can't remember, but I was just a prolific poster because I just was, I had a couple good mentors, but it was really hard to get a hold of information like this. So I think this is a great thing. And I think you were talking, Trent, a little bit about maybe doing some business topics, and I think that's great because I think most surveyors and civil engineers are really crummy business people, and everything I know about business, I basically had to teach myself out of a book or learn the hard way. So I think that's great. So I commend you and Rob for putting this together. I think it's great. So I'll just say right at the top here that I didn't script this. I've got some information I'll show you guys, but I didn't script it. I was hoping it would kind of be more of a back and forth conversation, and I got a list of topics I'll show you. We can talk about whatever. I'll let people pick from the list if there's some things they specifically want to hear about, and if not, I'll just give you kind of my standard spiel. But I like to tell people when I teach that I usually have more questions than answers. You know, a lot of times guys will get up at the beginning of a presentation and they want to convince you how smart they are. You know, most of the time my life is a whirlwind and I'm getting my butt kicked. I'll just be honest. I started a business this year in February, right before COVID, and things have been really tough. So this is hard, and I try and stay humble, and I don't have all the answers, man. So, but I'll try and share some things I've learned. You know, I got to be careful about just taking advice and applying it to your own situation. Every situation is different. Every company is a little bit different, but I'll try and share some general principles. Just take it with a grain of salt. I also have a tendency to offend people, so don't get too offended. I try and keep things light. Don't take me too serious, I guess is kind of what I'm saying. I realize there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, and I'm just one man. I've been married almost 20 years, and one thing you learn after you've been married for almost 20 years is you don't know very much and you're usually wrong. So that's kind of my disclaimer. So I do think field surveying is really important, though. And here's something else I tell people. I think it's really hard to run a good surveying business. That's a really hard thing to do. And when I say business, I mean organization too. It could be a public sector organization. That's just really hard to run an effective, well-oiled machine as a land surveyor. And I think most people that think it's easy probably aren't doing a good job and have just fooled themselves. So it's really, really hard. And I don't know if you want to say I've had the privilege or the could be a curse too, but I've tried to build mapping departments from the ground up at 2 or 3 different, maybe 4 different organizations across Central California. And if I've learned one thing from that experience, it's that it's really tough. And so part of what we're going to talk about today, managing field surveys, is really tough. One of the reasons I picked this as a topic that I like to teach is because I find it's frequently the break point. It's frequently, you know, when something goes wrong on a survey, often it can be traced back to that field to office interface. Not always, you know, sometimes you just get somebody that makes a bust in a CAD drawing or something, but oftentimes the problem lies at either, you know, poor communication from office to field or back the other direction. And so one of the things I really became deeply engrossed in at a couple of my last jobs was how to fix those problems. And so this talk is kind of based on that information. So Trent, can we share my screen for just a few minutes?
You should be good to go. You should be able to share it.
Yeah, let me do that real quick. All right, so I just want to show you guys my website. I'll just show you a couple things on the website. So if you come here over odds and ends, that's kind of where I keep all my stuff for surveyors. And there's a couple things I wanted to show you guys. So I don't know why this wasn't intentional, but I actually have some information for this workshop on the website. It's the only one. I don't know why this one, but so there's some slides in here. I must have given this talk at CLSA or at a conference or something, but the slides are here. My speaker outline's here. I've got a little sample. So when I do field notes, I like the first page of my field notes to just kind of be a little summary of the timeline of the field survey. There's a sample of that there. So I just wanted to show you guys that. And then also, if you go under odds and ends, there's the survey guideline page. So I've spent a lot of time over the last few years trying to develop written guidelines, and I'm trying to share those with folks. And so there's a bunch of field surveying stuff on here I just wanted to share with you guys. So I've got guidelines here about field notes, photos. I've got sample note forms. We'll talk about field packages today, probably. I have some guidelines there and some samples. Then I have some of my guidelines by survey type, control, building, boundary. I think I'm working on the topo. It's not up here yet, but anyways, I encourage you guys to check that out if you're looking for some ideas about how you can have some written guidelines for your field surveys. So again, that's just under the odds and ends menu there on the website. So I think you guys can still see my screen. I've got this notepad up here. So these are just some things we can talk about today. And I want to let you guys pick if there's a topic you care about here. I'd like you guys to let me know, and we can kind of focus on that. So we could talk about kind of large companies versus small, what the differences are. I've worked at 3-person firms, and I've worked at 500-person firms. So there are some differences. Union versus non-union. I've done both of those. They are very different, and I think there's some implications for those of you that work in states that allow unions. There's some major differences in how you have to manage your field work, depending on if you're union or non-union. And then just some tips for prepping for surveys, for executing, for reviewing field surveys. We can talk about why I think it's important to review your raw data and what you should do in your raw data review. We can talk a little bit about the role of the field coordinator. That's a really important role that I developed when I was over at Odell Engineering, because we were having some problems, and I could talk about the specific problems that role is designed to solve. We can talk just about some things, to kind of make you more efficient in your field work, point number ranges, feature codes, standard field notes, how to manage your field photos. We can talk about why I think it's important to have written guidelines for your field surveys. We can talk about what a field drawing is. We use field drawings to manage some of our field work. We can talk about how you can use GIS to manage your field work. So all those things, I can't fit that all in an hour, but we could certainly talk about any of that. So I just wanted to kind of give people an opportunity to pick a topic there. And if there was anything, maybe you could send that to the chat. And Trent, I don't know if I can see the chat, so maybe you can let me know if anything comes up.
Yeah, anybody can just unmute themselves and chime in.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. And
Yep.
I found the chat box. So is there anything specific people want to hear about? Is there anything there that piques your interest? If not, I can just kind of go into my typical spiel. But
Jocelyn, Nolan, Jeremy, anyone?
Could you do a little bit of the role of the field coordinator?
Sure. Talk about that. Yep.
I thought that'd be up your alley.
Okay, so let's talk about that, and then just kind of as an introduction to that, let me talk a little bit about kind of large companies versus small companies, and I'll leave this list up for a few minutes in case somebody wants to hear something off the list. So here's one of the things I've learned. So as your size of your surveying organization grows, it gets exponentially more difficult to manage your field work. Everything gets more difficult. I tell people it's 50 times as hard to run a 20-person firm as it is a 10-person firm, right? So it's like you double the number of people, the management headache doesn't double, it triples or quadruples, and that's just the nature of the beast. And so I've spent the last, half a dozen years developing all these systems and procedures to manage field work, and then I started my own 3-person firm, and now I'm like, man, I don't need a bunch of that anymore, which is great. It's very refreshing because I'm on my boots hit the ground on every job, So I don't need to prepare field packages like I did before. I don't need to, I'm reviewing all the raw data because I'm the guy doing the work. So, the reason I mentioned that at the beginning is if you're working for a 3-person firm or a 5-person firm, or maybe even an 8-person firm, and the LS is deeply integrated in the field work, some of what we're going to talk about today isn't as important. Here's where I think it becomes really important. When that licensed land surveyor gets 1 or 2 or 3 layers removed from the actual field work, I think that's when this gets really important. And I think as a licensed surveyor and responsible charge, you better have a system in place to manage your field work. And you should probably really have some written guidelines that your crews follow. And I would argue not just some like general written guidelines, but also, a specific written handoff on every field survey assignment. And I think one of the reasons why that's important, besides the fact that it'll help you avoid mistakes, is you always want to be able to go back to the board or to your attorney that works for your professional liability insurance company when there's a claim, and you want to be able to demonstrate that you are actually in responsible charge of your field work. And you need to be able to do that with something that's in writing, right? Some documentation. So, hey, here's our standard guidelines that were followed. Here's the handoff. Here's the written handoff for this particular field survey. Here's the instructions that we sent to the crew. Hey, here's our checklist when we reviewed their raw data to make sure there weren't any mistakes. You want to be able to do that. I remember I heard a talk at a conference one time by a gentleman that was both a land surveyor and an attorney, and he said the worst part of his job was having to defend land surveyors in a lawsuit that were poorly dressed and poorly documented. That was his nightmare. So like, you don't want to be that guy, right? You want to make sure that you're covering your ground there. So I think there's a responsible charge issue there that licensed land surveyors need to be aware of. One thing I tell my clients is now that I own my own small company, like my boots hit the ground on every job. I look at every corner. Now I realize not all licensed surveyors can do that. I've worked at lots of companies where that wasn't practically possible, but if you can't be there, LS, on the ground, I think you better have some systems in place. You better be, how do you evaluate evidence in a boundary survey if you haven't looked at some photographic evidence of every corner monument or every search area? I don't know how you do that. Well, if you're going to do that, you have to have systems in place, right? So I think as organizations grow in size, the need for this kind of structure gets more and more important. So let's talk about what the field coordinator is, kind of how I developed that role when I was at Odell Engineering to solve a couple specific problems. I don't think I invented the role. I don't want to take credit for that. I think there's other organizations that have this kind of role, but it's something that I had never seen before when I did it at Odell Engineering. And I really liked it because it's a great place to kind of put your crusty old party chiefs. I had my party chief my very first party chief that I went to work for as a chainman right out of college ended up coming to work for me as a licensed surveyor about 10 years down the road. And so he came to work for me, and we hired him specifically to fill this role, this field coordinator role. And it was perfect. Like it was the perfect role for him. He was okay on a computer. He didn't have, he wasn't a CAD drafter. He typed with his 2 index fingers, but he had this great field experience and this knowledge of how things needed to be done. One of the problems I think in a lot of organizations is, you get somebody that has got a bachelor's degree, and you kind of put them in charge of the field crews, and they kind of, they haven't earned their stripes. They haven't paid their dues. And I've seen that fail more than one time, right? Like, I really think this field coordinator role, if you're going to put somebody in that role, it needs to be somebody that's had, some years, plural, of experience in the field, somebody that the field crews can respect. I think that's really important. So what is the role? So the problem I was having at Odell Engineering is, I had, I want to say 4 licensed surveyors that all worked under the principal, and we kind of split things up between mapping and construction. So I had 4 licensed surveyors, plus we had some civil engineers that we were taking care of. And I had, I want to say I had somewhere between 4 and 6 2-man field crews. And here's the problem we had is there was no central conduit for how to schedule field work. and how to determine what the requirements of the field survey were and how to determine if the crews had completed their work properly. And so you can imagine that was basically chaos, right? So here's what would happen. Trent would have a crew scheduled to go out on Tuesday to do his boundary topo, and Nolan would be running a job staking he's doing construction staking at a gas station, and the contractor would call Nolan and be desperate to get wood in the ground, and Nolan would just call and reschedule Trent's crew, and he wouldn't talk to Trent, or he would talk to Trent, but Trent would forget to tell the crew that had the robot that the other crew needed to stake the gas station. And this just happened all the time. Like, I showed up at this company, we were doing $3 to $5 million a year with the surveying work, and like there was no system. Like, every surveyor talked to the crew they wanted. They scheduled their work. Everybody was running around trying to figure out what was going on with the equipment. There were no, depending on which LS you worked for, how you did the field survey was different. And so I got in there, and they didn't make me the boss right away. My boss said, "Hey, I just want you to kind of come in and just hang out for the first 3 months." And they actually just kind of made me a drafter and stuck me in a cubicle with everybody. And I just kind of watched. And so I'm watching all this go on for 90 days. And so they finally just, make the announcement that I'm going to take over the survey manager position. And man, one of the very first things I did was say, all right, that's it. We are having a central person that's going to manage all the field surveys. And in the beginning, that person was me. And I was like, you need a crew project manager, whether you were a civil or an LS, you come to me, right? You tell me what you need and when you need it. Right? We'll have a conversation if you're a licensed surveyor about how the work's going to get done, right? And then we'll get that work scheduled. And you don't call up a field crew to schedule work or to provide directions without talking to me on the pain of losing your pinky finger. Like, that was the system that we had to put into place. And and we started solving some of these problems we had, right? And it worked really good until I was working about 75 hours a week. And then I was just dying because I was trying to run projects, do business development, and run these crews. So here's something else I tell people when I talk about this. If you've got 6 field crews, or let's say 4 field crews, you got 4 2-man field crews, you got a full-time job there running those crews. That's the bottom line. If you don't have a full-time person dedicated to running those crews, your organization is probably a disaster. And I'm just being brutally honest. And I think when you reach 8 people, 4 crews, because you got the ability to run some one-man crews in a pinch. When you reach that level, the amount of management that goes into properly running that many guys, that's a full-time job, folks. Right? I'm not saying it has to be an LS. I'm not saying it has to be an LSIT, but there is a full-time job there. Okay, so let me tell you what the field coordinator, what his role was. So, because we had a couple problems. Remember, I told you that interface between field and office is often the break point, right? That's where things break down. So if I, as an LS, by the way, I made myself follow my own rules. So when we hired this guy to fill this role, if I wanted a field survey, I didn't get to just call my favorite crew. I had to go to him. I made myself follow the same rules all my other LSs had to follow, right? Even though I was running the department, because I think that's the way it should work. So if I went to his name was Brent. If I went to Brent, my field coordinator, and I wanted a survey, here's what we started doing. I had a field survey request that you had to bring to Brent, right? And it was a one-page form, right? And it had all the information that the crew was going to need. Starting point number ranges, existing control coordinates, sketch of the mapping limits, their contact for site access. There's all this stuff that the crew needs, right, to do their job. And so the LS, when he would go to get his work on the schedule, he would have to go to Brent and he would have to bring that. We call it a field survey request. We had to bring it to him. And here's the problem I had, guys. For the first 60 days, guys would call my field coordinator and say, hey, I need a crew in 2 days to do X, and they wouldn't have the request, right? You guys know what the problem with that is, right? Then I've got a crew at a site the gate's locked. They don't have the equipment they need. They don't understand what the mapping limits are. They don't know if they're doing the dips, manhole dips or not, right? And so we had to just enforce the discipline. And here's what I had to teach my LSs. You don't get on the schedule without the written request, period. That was the rule. And like, guess what? I started to enforce that rule. And the first couple times my LSs had to call their client or the PE, the civil, and tell them that they were late because they couldn't get a crew scheduled. My field coordinator started getting his survey requests in writing, right? And I'm going to come back and tell you why that's so important in just a minute. So that was kind of the first half, is just managing the requests for fieldwork that would come from the LSs, right? And I had some guys that would do a great job of that, right? And then there's always one or two guys that are just like, you know, they bring you a burrito wrapper with some permanent marker on it, you know, and they got their lunchtime boogers dried on there, and they're like, oh, here's my field survey request, right? Like we had one or two of those guys that it was a constant problem, right? And we had to keep kicking that stuff back. Hey, this isn't on the standard form. You don't have a mapping limits exhibit. The site contact isn't listed, right? And I just would beat it into my licensed surveyors. Like, look, I got a crew on a job site and they're farting around because you don't have your crap together. That's costing us real money, right? Half a day is $1,500, right? By the time everything's said and done. And I was like, and I would bill their job. If they showed up and that site wasn't ready, I was hitting that PM's job, right? And I had to be a dictator. And you got to remember, the reason I'm telling you this is, if you're going to try and implement this system, you got to be ready for some pushback, because there's right now, if you're running kind of a whirlwind and those LSs are used to just going straight to their crews, they're going to push back against this, right? They're not going to like that control. They're not going to like the structure, but it's really vital for your organization. I think when you get to about 3 or 4 or 5 crews, it's really important. So the first thing the field coordinator had to do is he had to just manage the civils and the licensed surveyors that would come and request field work. You know, he had to have a system in place to track those requests as they came in. We'll talk about why that's important. Here's the other really important thing. If you hire that guy and he's not licensed, you got to back him up, because your licensed surveyors will try and run over him. So you can't do that. If you got an LSIT or an experienced party chief in that role, everybody in that organization has to know that you as a survey manager have his back. Because if you don't do that, if you don't back that guy up, the whole system falls apart. So those licensed surveyors got to know that when your field coordinator says, hey, I don't have a survey request, you're not getting on the schedule, that they're not going to get around that, right? They're not going to get around that requirement. Okay, now let's talk about the other half of this guy's job. So the other half of this guy's job, once he got the survey request, right, Brent would go to the crew, the assigned crew, and the LS could request a crew if he wanted. He would go to the crew and he'd say, hey, here's the field survey request. This is what we need you to do. Here's the day I've got you scheduled. Do you have any questions about this handoff from the LS? Well, yeah, it says we got to do dips. Does that mean we got to do them in this street over here? Or is it just the main street, or whatever the questions are? You know, do we have survey grade stakeout for the boundary? You know, whatever questions the crews had. He would relay that back to the LS, make sure that the LS got the information back to the field crew before the survey was executed. Then the field crew goes out and does the survey. Okay, but his job's not done. Then when the field crew came back and told the field coordinator, all right, we're done, we've downloaded, the field crew had a checklist. The field coordinator had a checklist of things that the crew was supposed to bring back. Field notes, photos, data collector files, right? All that stuff. He would check the data into Trimble Business Center. He would look at it. Did they do coding? Did they run their line work? You can't believe how freaking hard it was for me to get crews to run line work. You know, did they use line work? Did they cover the mapping limits like we asked them to cover? Did they look for all the corners they were supposed to look for? So he did a thorough QA/QC. Sometimes that might take him an hour, might take him 2 hours, depending on what they were doing to review that data, right? Then if the crew didn't do their job right, he'd get a hold of the LS and say, hey, we got a problem. The crew didn't do what you asked. You know, I'm going to follow up with them. I need to get them back out there tomorrow. Him and the LS would have that conversation, and he'd call up my crew and say, hey, you know, you didn't do what you were told. We got to go back. Or he'd call them up and say, hey, you guys did a great job. I got everything I needed, whatever it was. But there was a level of QA/QC that happened there on the part of the field coordinator. Part of the reason that was so important, guys, is because my average LS project manager in that organization was too busy to take the time to do that QA/QC, right? They were supposed to be doing it, but the reality is they weren't doing it, because when they got busy, the very first thing that got pushed was that QA/QC, right? And those guys, and you've been there, we've all been there, right? You just give me that point file, man. I got a client screaming at me for a deliverable, right? And so having the field coordinator in that role, he just prevented that problem, because that was his whole job. Now, I want you to think about this. If you're running 4 crews and you've got a guy that's reviewing survey requests, right? Potentially 4 survey requests a day, right? And he's checking in the data. He's got four field survey deliverables to check every day, right? At an hour, hour and a half, or 4 hours. Do you see how we get to a full-time job really quick, right? It doesn't take much. Now, once you have that full-time guy, there's some other things you can delegate to him that really makes sense for that field coordinator role, right? So like that guy was tracking all the maintenance on the equipment. He was tracking all the firmware on all the data collectors and the total stations. He was figuring out when we needed to replace batteries. He was managing all the maintenance on the survey vehicles. He was taking care of the registration and insurance on the survey boat. Like, there was everything that was field related that I was too busy to do, that I wasn't doing a good job of. We gave to that guy. And I tell you what, for the size of the organization we were, paying that guy 75 grand a year made a ton of sense. Hey, he was worth every dollar, right? And what that allowed me to do, it did 2 things, guys. Number one, it allowed me to focus on my high value tasks as a survey department manager, right? And number 2, we saw a huge improvement in the quality of our work product, because we eliminated a bunch of the problems that we were having between field and office, right? Because I had a central guy, everything was going by him. And like, look, it was great because he made sure that the project surveyors were given a good handoff, and he made sure that the field crews were coming back with a good product, right? And here's what I tell people I frequently tell people when I talk about this. Project surveyors, you give your field crew a napkin sketch for a handoff, you deserve the pile of horse manure they bring back. That's the deal, right? It's a 2-way street, right? So what happened is once we implemented this system with the field coordinator, and we had field survey requests and field packages going out to the crews, right, and a checklist coming in, now I could start to hold people accountable, right? So I'll give you an example of what happens in your typical survey, right? So I send a crew an hour and a half to the Bay Area to do a survey, and they come back, and we didn't dip 2 of the manholes we were supposed to dip, right? So the LS comes to me and says, hey, Bob and Dave didn't dip those 2 manholes. Now I got to go back. Who's paying for that trip? I'm going to blow my budget, right? And I say, oh man, yep, that sucks. That's not good, right? I said, I'll call Bob and Dave. So I call Bob and Dave, and I say, hey, Trent said you guys didn't dip 2 of the manholes you were supposed to dip. Now we got to go back tomorrow. I got you scheduled at another job. What the heck? Now, what do you think Bob and Dave tell me if you've ever been in this situation? They say, well, Trent never told us that we had to dip those 2 manholes, right? So I called Trent. I said, Trent, the crew said you didn't tell them to dip those 2 manholes. Trent says, oh, no, I told them 3 times, right? Like, I know I'm not the only person that's been through this, right? So here's the problem when you don't have a system in place, is it's really hard to hold people accountable. So look, once I had that system in place with some things and with some, I had stuff in writing. I had a written survey request. I had a written field package. I had a written checklist that came back from the crew. I had field notes on every survey, right? Well, once I had stuff in writing, now I can hold people accountable. So here in that same situation, here's what I do. I'd go and look at the field survey request, and I'd be, all right, did Trent tell these guys they were supposed to dip the manholes or not? Right? And if I looked at the field package and Trent had on there dip all the manholes in Blake Avenue, then I'd go back to the crew and I'd say, hey, it's your responsibility to read and understand the field package. Trent did his job. You didn't do your job. This can't continue. There's going to be consequences, right? Or maybe I'd look at the survey request and I'd find out, hey, Trent didn't ask him to dip the manholes in Blake Avenue. Then I'd go back to Trent and say, hey, the crew did everything you asked. You didn't do your job right, right? And then half the time Trent says, oh, yeah, you know what? Actually, now that I think about it, the civil asked for that after the fact, or whatever, right? But you can't hold people accountable if you don't have a system and if you don't put things in writing, right? And I tell people all the time, if you don't have a system that involves some paper, I'm not talking about physical paper, but if you have a system that involves some documentation, it doesn't count. It doesn't count. Right? I'm not, you know, they used to call me the checklist Nazi. I'm not saying you got to bury people in paperwork. That's not what I'm telling you to do. But if you're managing a large organization with a half a dozen crews, you've got to get a system in place. You've got to have some documentation, or you can't hold people accountable. And look, if you can't hold people accountable, you can't fix the problems, right? That's the bottom line. And like, think about in the last 12 months of your organization, how many return trips you've made to the field because there was some kind of miscommunication between the field staff and the office staff, right? And here's another thing. So I can't remember who taught me this. Somebody taught me this. I don't know who it was, but they said field crew time is the most expensive time in a survey organization. Like based on the hourly rate, like that is the most expensive time, right? You cannot afford to make return trips. You keep unnecessary return trips. You can't afford it. If you are doing that, some guy like me that has a system in place is going to eat you for breakfast at some point because I'm not carrying those costs. And guess what? We don't have 40% profit margins in the survey industry, right? We've got 15 or 20%. So if you're making 2 trips when I'm making 1 trip, you're going to be out of business. That's how important this is for guys in the private sector. So, all right. Anyway, so there you go. There's field coordinator. I hope that helps. So just a central role, right, that can kind of mediate between the project surveyors and the field crews and keep people accountable. And you know, if you got your survey manager trying to do that and you're running 6 crews, he's probably too busy. He's probably too busy and it's getting neglected. I really think it deserves a dedicated role. So, and I miss it because now I'm a small shop. I only have 3 or 4 full-time people, and I miss having a field coordinator because now I have to do all that stuff myself. But I'm not running 6 crews too, so it's a little bit easier.
Exactly. Kent had one talk about some preparing surveys, and then Sean had talk about union shops. How do you manage and set expectations of quality of work and foster motivations in the crews?
Okay, so let me just real quick talk about prepping for field surveys. So I had a rule. I don't follow this rule anymore because I'm on the ground for every job, but I had a rule that so we had something called a field package, and basically you didn't get a crew on the schedule without a field package. Now, what goes into a field package? So at a minimum, I would ask my crew we did a road safety review. So anytime we had work in the road, they had to fill out a little 1-page form. What's the speed limit? Is there a physical median? What's the shoulders look like? How heavy is the traffic? Because I think that's something that office surveyors forget about, right? Like, it's right there on the map, just go do it. So at a minimum, they had to do a road safety review if we were doing work in the road. They'd have to provide not only a control file, but at my shop, you should have a photo of that control point. So control point file, photo of the control point, right? And like I'm going to tell you guys, like I was just at a job site on Friday where I had set the control, and I thought I was going to have to come home because I forgot the pin finder and I couldn't find my rebar, right? And like I didn't right, man, like so. There's a reason why I have my rules, and I need to follow my own rules. So road safety review, control point file, photos of the control, right? And then I always had a little exhibit, and every survey, an 11x17 exhibit with an aerial background with some standard notes. Every time, no excuses, right? Now, let me clarify something. If a crew had a couple days of work, 2 or 3 days of work on the same job, I didn't require a separate package for every day. Right? But basically 1 unit of field surveys that required a package. So let me see if I can show you guys what one looks like. I didn't realize I was still sharing my screen. So let's see. Let me see if I've got this on the website, guys. So here's my road safety checklist, by the way. I don't know if I actually have a field package on here, but here's the guidelines of the field package. Okay, so information on survey control, site access and safety, right? The mapping limits, the search point priority if they're doing a boundary, the link to where they're supposed to store the data after they download. We had problems with that. So all that information would go on a field package. I really wish I had an example to show you guys.
I did save down all of your stuff off the website, and I put it in
Okay.
the Dropbox link. So
All right, I'll
we'll
try
have all
and
that.
I'll try and find a field package, guys, and send it to Trent so he can share it. But yeah, just 11 by 17 exhibit with some standard notes and a map and an aerial background, even if it's GIS grade and the mapping limits, right? Goes out to every crew. Okay. All right, so that's how I recommend you prep your surveys. And I, like I said before, if it's not documented, it doesn't count, right? So like if you're just picking up the phone to line out your crew, in my world, that does not count. That is not a properly prepared field survey, right? This is not, right? Yep.
I
Trent?
was gonna say I can add to that here, and at least for our internal use, we you're sending guys out with most of the time you're sending them out with some kind of TBC file or data collector file ready to go. We've been uploading the KML files right into the job file,
Yeah.
and then that way it's pick up everything inside this red box.
Yep.
And that way they know the survey limits. They can see the survey limits on their maps inside the collector, that kind of stuff. So you're able to make sure that that's one QA/QC check as well. Just did you pick up everything inside the red box?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So that's one thing we use here internally.
So KMLs work good. I know a lot of field crews like those because they can pull them up on their phone or their tablet. Yep, that works good. Another thing I would say that I would put in the field package is just if there were any special instructions. I like that the way the GLO used to do it, right? Like when you got a contract with the GLO, like you got instructions for your survey. I think they still do that. Like if you're a GLO survey and you get assigned a case file or whatever, like there's instructions on what. So like, I'll give you an example. If your crew is out doing a boundary survey and let's say they're tying corners fast static or RTK with an on-site base maybe, and they got a corner under a tree and they can't get good GPS lock under the tree, does every crew in your organization know what they're supposed to do next? And would they all do it consistently? Like that's the question you have to ask, right? If the answer to that question is no, you've got a problem, right? As the LS and responsible charge. So you know what? That's the kind of other information that needs to go in a field package potentially if you don't have good written stand. Another thing is like, all right, you're gonna go out and you're gonna do a topo survey and you got to get some information on some buildings. Like, what is that? Like, what information on the building? Is it drip line? Is it finished floor? Do you need to know where the doors are? Like, so if you look on my standards online, we've got 4 different types of building surveys, type 1, 2, 3, 4. They each have a different set of stuff that's needed depending on what, if we're just doing a topo and the building's going to get demolished for site development, and it's just the drip line. It's 4 corners, right? If we're doing I was working in downtown San Francisco where they were remodeling a shopping center. Like, all right, then there was all kinds of structural detail they needed, right? So it just depends, but your crews need to know what they're doing. So, all right, let's talk about the union for a minute. Okay, so I have to make a confession. I am not a huge fan of the union. Okay, so I want to put that out on the table. I'm not trying to offend anybody, but so you take me with a grain of salt here because I am not a big union fan. So I have worked at non-union and union companies. I've worked at 2 union companies and I've worked at 3 or 4 non-union companies. There are huge differences and there are implications for how you manage your field surveys. So let me tell you the challenge with being at a union firm, okay? And I think it's primarily one challenge. And this is the thing I like the least about the union, okay? And there are a couple good things about the union, so I will share those. But let me start with that maybe. Let me start with the good stuff so people don't tell me I'm a hater. So here's what I like about the union. What I like about the union is you don't have to fight with your boss about getting your field guys a raise because they just come every 6 months like clockwork. That just takes a whole lot of pressure off. You guys are probably, if you're union, you guys are probably getting paid more than they're worth anyways. And, I like not having to go fight with my boss every time a Robin wanted a $1.50 raise, right? So I like that about the union. It's all set. You don't have to argue about it. The other thing I liked about the union that I think the union could potentially do really well with, I think they're not doing really well with this, but I think they could, is if they got their crap together, they could have a really effective training program. And they're very good at getting their union employees to train not on your nickel. So they have to go to weekly classes. If you don't work for a union firm, you don't know this, but they've got to do weekly classes at least for the first 2 or 3 years. And that's on their nickel. That's not on the company nickel. And man, like try and get employees today, like try and get millennials to do training on their own nickel, right? It was like almost impossible. So I really like that part of the union. having said that, based on some feedback I've gotten from my folks, the classes are a joke. They're not well taught. But there is potentially an opportunity there for the union to do a really great service for the profession and for their employers. So those are a couple potentially good things about the union. All right, here's the big problem with the union when it comes to quality of field surveys. The big problem with the union is it's really hard to cross-train your guys. So it's very difficult to cross-train between field and office. Now you might think, well, hey, what's the big deal with that, Landon? Okay, so I'll tell you what, in my opinion, is the big deal with that. You just don't do a topo like you do a topo after you've run your own surface models. You just don't do a topo like you do a topo after you've drafted your own topos. You just don't, collect information in the field on a boundary survey like you do until you've had to read somebody else's crappy field notes when you're trying to put together a boundary in the office. There's something about seeing that other side of the table that really makes you a better field surveyor. Now, the flip side is also true. I think, I've worked with guys, they graduate Fresno State with a 4-year bachelor's degree, and they've gone and they've spent 2 or 3 or 4 years in the office. And like, those guys shouldn't be running crews. There's something about not, if you haven't been out in the peat dirt in 110-degree heat, or in the Thule fog in 32-degree weather, or in the blowing snow, or carrying a rover pole waiting to get struck by lightning, you just don't have the same appreciation for what that job involves, right? That, to me, is the biggest challenge with the union shops, is it's really hard to cross-train your guys, right? Now, the other thing is, even if you could, and there's limits, so the union will place limits on how much you can run a field guy in the office. The other challenge is, by the time the guys have gone through that journey process, there's guys making $48 an hour that can't turn on a computer. How do you bring that guy in and teach him anything in the office? He's just going to blow you. He's so expensive at that point that the only thing he can do is field work. And I don't think that's good for the profession, and I don't think it's good for the field surveyor. Now, you can't change that, right? So how do you make it work? That's the challenge, right? If you work for a union firm. So there's a couple things you can do. Communication with those field crews at a union firm is really important. Right. So you got to be talking to those guys every day. When I worked at union crews, every day at 7 a.m., 6 or 7 a.m., and at 2 or 3 p.m., I was on the phone with them every day. How'd it go today? Were there any issues? Did you do what I told you? Did you not do what I told you? Is there a reason why you didn't do what I told you? Did you take your field notes? Did you get my photos? Like, you got to be having that day-to-day with your union crews, right? And the other thing is, I would look for opportunities within the rules to get them as much exposure to the rest of your operation as possible, right? So that could be something as simple as having those guys come in, download their own data, check it into TBC, check their check shots in TBC, or like a G-Matics office, whatever you're using, right? Have them, review their field package, make sure, see if they've got any questions. You can get an hour or two a day out of those guys potentially without the union, flipping their lid. The other thing you need to do sometimes is you just got to pay them to come in and do some training and explain to them, hey, here's why it's so important that you guys properly use field to finish, because here's what happens in the office after we get your data. And you have to take an hour on a Friday and explain to them, when you guys don't do your job, this is how it affects us in the office. This whole system falls apart. Right? You got to have those conversations. If you have good union employees, they will care about that. They will care about doing a good job, right? But without a doubt, it is more difficult to run a union shop for the sole fact that your field guys aren't going to get the same level of exposure to what is done in the office that they would otherwise. Now, I'm a small shop, but here's what I tell people. I don't think I'll ever hire, I hope my company grows in the next couple of years. I don't think I'm ever going to hire somebody that can only work in the field. I don't think I'm going to do it. I got a guy called and asked me for a job yesterday. He said, hey, can I get a job? I think I could stand there and hold that prism. I said, look, bro, he's a friend of mine. We've been friends forever. I said, you want to come to work for me? Here's the deal. I don't have that job. You want to come to work for me? You better know how to run a computer. You better know how to do some basic stuff in AutoCAD. You better know some trig. You better know some algebra. You better know some basic geometry. Right? Like, because I don't have only field jobs anymore. I don't. You're going to come to work for me, you better be able to at least come in, download your data, process it in TBC, maybe do some minor adjustments, make sure, I don't have jobs for monkeys. I don't have them. Right. And so that's one of the challenges with the union model is, how do you, it's just tough. Now, the union requirements are pretty strict. Like those guys got to know that math to get through the program. So as long as that's being properly enforced at the union by the union at a local level, and your guys aren't cheating, they're going to absorb some of that. But yeah, union shops I found them to be a challenge. I've worked at two different union shops. So, all right, I know I'm getting close to running out of time, Trent.
Okay, Landon.
Yep.
Steve Parrish here. I just want to share a couple of comments quick in comparison to, excuse me, the federal government anymore, particularly the BLM.
Yeah.
You had mentioned earlier about, a set of special instructions. Yes, they still do that. They have people specifically in their offices to put together these special instructions. They do all the research and so forth. The BLM years ago didn't used to contact a lot of people or even check with a lot of the private survey data, but they do now, and they have done for the last couple of decades.
That's awesome.
And in addition, what they've done now with what you were just addressing, the surveyors used to be a lot of just field surveyors. They would prepare some draft notes and things of that nature. But today's BLM surveyor, for the most part, most of the state offices that I'm familiar with now, the surveyor that is assigned to do the survey does the field notes and everything now ready for just final review and publication. So it isn't that they used to just do a draft and they used to do a draft of the plat. Now they do it to completion. Now, I'm not sure that that's the very thing in all 12 of the state offices, but the ones I'm more familiar with, they've been cut down on their number of staff. So the surveyors now that come in with the BLM, a full performance 1373 land surveyor, is from field to finish all the way through. There are still a few people that look over their back on a few things because they try to keep things as consistent as they can.
Yeah.
With respect to that field set of special instructions, the other side of that is a BLM surveyor is not allowed to go out and put his foot on the ground and do any survey work without that set of special instructions, period.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's good.
Yeah, just a little insight there.
So I guess they've learned something after 200 and some years of surveying, huh? They figured some of that stuff out.
Yeah, particularly from about 1906 or 7 on, when they went to the direct system and got out of the contract system.
Yeah. Yeah, see, I didn't work at the BLM out of college, Steve, so I had to learn some of those things the hard way myself, is what happened.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a lot of people still misunderstand. They like to throw arrows at the BLM. And, they're like any other organization. They're all humans, too, and they make mistakes. I've made my share in my career. And but if you don't learn from those mistakes, and then the other point you're making there about being in responsible charge. I've lectured a number of times on responsible charge. You, me, Trent, any one of the rest of us that are licensed, we are no better than the people we train and send to the field to do our work.
Yeah.
And the biggest things that I have observed in the last few years is that one person crew out there with nobody else looking at the ground but them, being sent out with a set of coordinates to go search for something or, set a monument, and they haven't had the proper training. And I know that it's tough to have a 2-person crew, but there's safety considerations. There are 4 eyes on the ground instead of 2. There's a whole lot of advantages, but we've certainly, with our technology, made it very possible to have a 1-person crew anymore. That person better be very well trained and intuitive and not afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
Sorry to take up your time.
No, that's a good comment. So let me just quickly respond to Steve. So I don't run 1-man crews at my shop. I only run 2-man crews. And in fact, I've been running a 3-man crew the last couple months because we got a kid that's graduating high school, and he doesn't cost me a whole lot. So I don't have a lot of sympathy for guys that say they can't afford to run a 2-man crew. I think it's an excuse to just put a little more profit in your pocket, and I think it does a disservice to the profession. I know a lot of people don't want to hear that, but the older I get, the more ornery I get, and I don't mind telling people that. The other thing too that Steve mentioned that I think is real important about responsible charges. I've got a guy that my business partner has been surveying for 15 years or 17 years, and him and I work together on every survey. And I find corners he doesn't find, and I worry about that. I as an LS, what that's demonstrated to me is that even with a guy that's been doing it 15 years, I still really need to go out and check that work, and this guy is awesome. Like he's a hard worker and he's a good surveyor and he cares about what he does, but he just, there's something about a guy that can sniff out a corner, like I got trained by one of the best corner hounds on this side of the Rockies. And he just taught me, like that guy would have me dig a 6-foot hole. And like, I just learned, and like, I've got a guy that's my partner that just didn't get taught like that. And even though he's a great surveyor, like he will walk away and tell me there's not a mon, and I will go behind him and find a monument. And like, if that guy who's got 15 years of experience and wants to get licensed and really cares about what he does can make that mistake, I know, there's a huge number of field surveyors out there that are not properly trained to look for corners. And it scares me. It does. It's scary. So there you go. We'll end on that depressing note.
Oh my goodness. That's funny. Out of the other topics, I don't know if anybody wanted to chime on any of that. Sean, did that help you out on the union side of things? Does your mic work? Nope, you're muted.
I'll chime in again here just a moment.
There you go.
One thing I just wanted to mention, we kind of delayed due to some personal problems on my end, jumping on board and making the presentation. So look ahead, Trent, and see where you'd like to fit it in again. And I'll work at it and be available.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was gonna send you an email.
When it comes to what Landon was just talking about, walking behind other people, I think because of 31 years of experience that I had, and probably the first 20, 22 years of those 31, I was in the field all the time. I've only got a few behind me that I've not visited myself, somebody else, but they brought back pictures or they brought back information that I knew it was there. The approach to survey is, let's say after 10 years in the profession, I realized I approached surveys from the standpoint of having to defend it in court, should that ever happen. And it's pretty tough to get in court and say, no, I really didn't visit that site. My surveyors did. So, well, what are you doing talking about it then, So up in, we really hardcore approach up in Northern Idaho. We were letting, 25 contracts at a time up there to private sectors. We would go out first, locate all of the controlling corners. We may not have every quarter corner in between, every section corner. We knew we had it logged in. The corners we didn't find, the quarters or sections, it was a standing order with the contractor that before they proportioned that corner in, we came back in and looked over their shoulder. Honest, whatever. We were finding somewheres around 75% of those corners that they couldn't find after they came in, searched again, then we came in and found them. And I only say that because this is what I've learned and believe is the truth. Those of us that have had the blessings and the good fortune of having worked for the government, deep pockets as they like to keep talking to us, we always had a budget, but we weren't constrained by our budget. So we could spend extra time looking. And it's the private sector that so often is under the gun, is budget conscious, has underestimated the job, that says, okay, I got the pressure on me. I can't search anymore. I can't search 3 days for this one monument. Well, you're going to be in a lot of trouble when you get into completion surveys and Benson Syndicate surveys and the likes, where maybe your search area could be a 700-foot circle on the side of 100% slope with lots of rocks and brush. How do you cover that kind of terrain thoroughly and know what you're looking for and just hope that it's there? I'll just leave you with the one thought that When I don't find a corner, that's the only thing I can say is I didn't find the corner. That doesn't mean it isn't there.
Right.
You know, you got to let your conscience be your guide when you're out there, and how much can you afford, you know, to leave behind, and how vigorously have you looked for the corner, and do you have the right people looking for the corner. I've been out of the field for a lot of years, and I know if I step back in again, I would have to look a lot closer because I'm kind of out of practice.
Nice. Sean, where are you located?
I'm in Connecticut.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yep.
Is it heavy union presence there, or?
In state government and municipal government,
okay.
there's a lot of unions. So,
Okay, yeah.
so sometimes it's tough trying to go a little bit above and beyond, you know, when they tell you that, oh, it's just mediocre, like you were saying before, you know, just spend a few minutes looking for a monument when, you know, you could spend a little longer and just doing a thorough job and, you know, keeping an eye out for quality work.
Right. Got it. Yeah, I was just curious where you were at.
And with your age of corners back there on that east, moving into several states of the 13 colonial and so forth, you guys have a particular challenge back there where our monuments are quite a bit younger than your monuments back there. I've been in the field with Don Wilson, and I've gone through some of the workshops back there where you guys are just looking at indentations in the ground for where bearing trees may have been 200 years ago. We're still finding bearing trees out here 150 years ago that were 10 inches when they were scribed, and they're 3-foot diameter today. That's still a challenge too to recognize them, but I sure know how much different it is having a survey back in that part of the country.
Yeah, Sean, I've never worked in the public sector, but I imagine what would be a challenge for me, and I don't have an answer to this. It's one of my unanswered questions, but you know, even though you work for the government, I imagine somebody's in responsible charge of that work. And so, you know, who gets to decide what the standard is for the field crew? Like that's a really critical conversation, and we have it in the private sector all the time. But I imagine it's more of a challenge in the public sector. Like, really, the LS that's in responsible charge of that work should be setting the standard that the crews have to follow. But I mean, I imagine that's tough. That could be tough to do, probably.
Yeah, on that, I worked for a local utility for 10 years too, and you know, it's your own personal belief, I guess, in wanting to do a good job and want to work, right? And so it's why I'm on my private side now too, rather than working for a utility anymore, because you get tired of doing the same thing over and over and over, just at a snail's pace, right? I mean, it was you get a survey request in, and it would be, oh, we'll get to it next week, and it could be Monday, but you know, things worked in weeks, not months. So it was kind of crazy. Not days. But.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Trent, and I appreciate everybody that.
Yeah.
Plugged in.
Anybody else got anything else?
Hey, Landon. Appreciate your talk. Jeremy Ketty. I'm a first-year geomatics student up out of Seattle, Washington. And I heard you say something earlier in your presentation that made me think a bit, which was kind of to this extent of paying your dues and you know, putting in your time, right? And I certainly appreciate that and learning in the field. What I'm looking for, what I'm curious to hear from you about is, I'm someone who has 20 years of software sales experience and just wanted to change to get out of the office back into the field.
Yeah.
In the same breath, I'm about to drop, you know, 40 to 50 grand on an education to get a bachelor's in geomatics.
Sure.
What's the right balance as far as field experience, as well as, you know, making sure I'm getting good return on my investment, if that makes sense?
Sure, that's a good question. So I'll just give you kind of some rules of thumb, and different guys will have different ideas about this, but you know, I think you got to have 2 years in the field before you know which end of a rod is the top end. That's just my rule of thumb. You know, it seems like it's about 2 years. I think it takes about 5 years to get to be a really good party chief. Like, I don't know of any really good party chiefs that have gotten there before 5 years. Now, you know, there's some companies that only do one particular thing. You know, maybe they're only doing utility surveys, or they're only, you know, but if you're working at, you know, doing different kinds of surveys, you know, I think it's a 5-year project to be a really good party chief. Now, I'll just be honest with you. I didn't do 5 years. in the field. I had probably 3 solid years in the field. I quickly got pulled in the office because of my computer skills, but every time I have an opportunity to get in the field since forever, like anytime somebody was sick or on vacation or, there was a deadline, like I as an office surveyor, I always jumped at the chance to get into the field. So I would encourage you to do that. I think it is, without a doubt, as an employer, I will tell you, it's way harder to find good office talent than it is to find good field. I can train good field talent. It's way harder to get guys in the office. And so what happens is if you were the type of guy with the brains to be a good office surveyor, that is like a vortex. It's like a black hole, and it's going to suck you that direction. And it's probably inevitable, especially if you're coming out of school with a bachelor's degree, there's a good chance you're destined for the office in the near future. My advice to you would be, fight that to the extent possible. Just do what you can to get as much field experience as you can. Tell you what, any field experience is going to put you ahead. I know guys that are trying to sit for their LSIT or their LS exam and have almost no field experience, right? Like, how does that happen? You have to have 2 years. Like, yeah, people fudge. Like, people get the signatures they need and are sitting for the test without the right field experience. So I don't know if that helps you or not. Like, yeah, you're probably hosed, man. You're headed to the office probably if you're going to get a bachelor's degree, but do what you can. Any chance you get to get out in the field, do that. And when I tell a lot of licensed guys, there's no reason why as a licensed guy you can't tell your employer, I want to be on the ground. I don't have to do all the field work, but I want to see every site in person, period. Like, make that a condition of your employment. I wish more LSs would do that. So that's an option you'll have when you get licensed.
Hey,
Perfect.
Landon.
Appreciate the feedback.
Yep.
A quick item, Landon. I do agree strongly that they should have the field experience, but it is true that they don't need to fudge it. Actually, you can sit for the license without actual field experience. Simply being that survey coordinator you talked about, that's enough information to actually qualify for the field side.
Okay, so there you go.
There's no problem with that. And that's what the board, I'm sorry, I should be clear.
There's
The
no
board doesn't have a problem with that. It's not, they should have that field experience. I agree.
Yeah. And one of the challenges we have as a profession is as we're getting more efficient in the field, like, technology is just amazing, right? And as we're getting more efficient, there's fewer and fewer opportunities for guys to get that field crew experience. There's just not as many jobs as a Rodman as there used to be. That's true of my company too. 30 years ago, I'd have 3 full-time guys, and now I get by with 1.5.
Yes.
It's a challenge. I don't know how we fix that.
Yeah, and Steve had a good point. You have a good point about that. Running these one-man crews, we're not passing that information on. At the same time, and this is kind of, sorry about the dog there, this might be kind of related to the union side of it, but those of us who do a lot of public works projects where we have prevailing wage, I used to, whenever I had a new guy, he would shadow the 2 guys for months, maybe a year. I can't have a guy shadowing for $40, $50 an hour. That doesn't happen anymore.
Too much money.
So, now I can only run 2 guys, for safety. If I'm running those 2 guys, one of them's the new guy, and I just can't run 3 guys anymore. I can't afford it. As far as I can't be competitive anymore.
Yeah.
Not for that type of work. In the private world, maybe in other areas in the country where, you can start a guy at $15, $20 an hour and have him learn. That's available, but it's not happening in California, at least.
Yeah, no, I don't know how we fix that. That's a big worry I have. For people that aren't in California, just so you guys know, I think in my area, so Rich is in SoCal, I'm in NorCal. I think my party chief prevailing wage it's right around 45, somewhere between 45 and $48 an hour. And then if you got a Robin with a couple years of experience, they're somewhere between 32 and 35. So we're paying, it's great money. Yeah,
yeah, you left out
Landon,
the fringe benefit though. That's 75 to $80 an hour.
Yeah.
And where in a union firm, that 25 to $30, I didn't mean to make this a union conversation, but where that 25 to $30 is going to the union for many things, political contributions and on and on and on. For a non-union firm, that 25 to $30 is going directly to the employee. So now they're truly making that money, which is fine. I got guys rolling around with, $300,000, $400,000 pensions after 4 or 5 years. That's the system. but it really makes it hard to train that new field guy. It really makes it hard to take the office guy and put him out in the field. However, that being said, all my guys, they download, they CAD, they run it. That's the way to run a survey firm, if you can.
So I guess one of the things that I get to do so I don't do a lot of public work. So for those of you that don't know, I know we got some students. So if you're either in the union or if you're working with government money, you pay prevailing wage in California. So bottom line is, if you're working on a government project, you're paying union wages. Okay. So because I do almost no public sector work, what I can do that a guy like Rich maybe can't from a competitive perspective is, I've got an 18-year-old kid making $18 an hour. And look, at $18 an hour, or he might even be making 15. I don't even remember. He just follows a party chief around, right? And if he does nothing of value all day long except watch that party chief, and he can drive to a hospital if somebody cuts their leg open, I'm coming out okay. And that's it, And the reason I make that investment, besides that I feel good about giving this young man an opportunity, is, I'm hoping in 3 years or 4 years, he's my next party chief. Right. And and I'm trying to take care of him so that a guy like Rich doesn't come along and steal him in 4 years, because sometimes that happens too. But yeah, it's a challenge if you're doing government work, because the training is an issue for sure.
Here's a thought, Landon.
Yeah.
With this COVID thing this year, we find it very, very easy in the office to do training by simply having someone watching the other person work and have them just kind of run a verbal dialogue through Teams or Zoom or Skype or whatever your preference is. And just as they're drafting, as they're making decisions, drawing center lines, whatever the case may be, cloud point extraction. So someone can train watching the person. They can even hand off control. I haven't tried this yet. Here's a thought. Put your phone in your pocket out in the field, Teams, have them virtually walk along as you're doing the survey.
I
haven't done it. Just a thought.
Yeah.
Now you're paying an office rate. Now they're learning in the in the AC while the guy's out in the heat.
Yeah, that's true.
There you go. There's your field experience. Watch it on TV like everything else.
Yeah,
We're gonna get there. Taking Zoom to the field.
Oh, we've definitely taken Zoom to field walks. That's for sure. If if I'm out of state and can't be on a field walk, I say fire it up on your shirt. Put it in your pocket with the camera sticking out, and just talk through the job for me, and I'll give you a price.
That's awesome. Landon, Jen wants you to come back. She wants you to talk on more topics that you had on your list. So.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, just let me know.
Yeah.
I appreciate being invited.
Yeah, that was cool. Thanks.
All right.
Anybody else got any more questions?
Rob McMillan here. Just great to have Landon on the pulpit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And thanks, Steve. And
he's
thanks
preached.
to Steve for chiming in too.
Absolutely.
Always.
But
Thank you, Landon. Appreciate it always.
I fixed Steve. He inspired me here, so I fixed his picture for my own profile.
That's funny.
So now we got 4 surveyors.
There you go. That's funny.
Yeah, and you got Washington on the correct side there too, Rich.
Yeah, that's funny.
I kind of like mine switched around. I gotta swap it sometime. But the reason I like mine up there is it's years and years I wanted to visit that site. And the last year that I was up in North Dakota, we came back down through South Dakota, and I got to visit the Mount Rushmore area. And I took tons of pictures around there. There's one thing you can swab them off, various sites, but it's a lot funner when it's a picture you own and you took personally.
Yeah, that's cool.
I agree, Steve. I married a woman from South Dakota 5 years ago, and this is my first chance just last month. So this was in person just last month.
Yeah, and if you ever get a chance to go to Devil's Tower over in Wyoming, that's a real neat place to visit too, and walk all the way around the base of that Devil's Tower, and realize quickly that the Devil's Tower is just a batch of molten lava that came up, did not break through the surface. At one time, they figured that Devil's Tower was covered with 900 feet of soil on top of it, and it's 900 feet tall.
Wow.
Think about the erosion since that spear of molten lava came up through. It's just awesome to walk around the base of the Devil's Tower.
That is a cool place. All right. Anybody else? Last chance?
I haven't been on since Christopher. Are you live there, Christopher? Done?
He's Rob said he's one of his guys. He jumped
Yeah,
on.
Okay.
I'm here.
There you go.
Ah, there you go. Where are you from, Christopher? You're one of Rob's guys down in Southern Cal?
Yes, I'm from San Diego right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I spent the better part of 10 to 12 years on a lawsuit down there about 45 miles east of San Diego. Maybe I'll give a little wrap up of that particular case someday.
That'd be
That'd be great.
great, Steve. Yeah, Chris is a civil engineering geospatial options student at Cal Poly Pomona. And he volunteered in our office here at Caltrans in San Diego for 2 years, coming in at 6:20 in the morning every morning, wearing slacks and a shirt and tie, and working in the office here. And then he'd duck out about 11:30 or so and go off and take his community college classes. So quite a bit of grit in that young man.
Yeah, congratulations. Yeah, I've had the pleasure of lecturing down at Cal Poly years ago too. So great to see you keep coming along, and maybe one of these days you'll be enjoying surveying as many years as I have.
Thank you. And I truly do plan to do that.
Sarah. Nolan said I had to pick on you because you're my spell checker. I had posted something and Sarah was like, I think you mean to say this.
Yeah, in my office, we're all trained to be grammar and spelling checkers and to be brutal about it.
Awesome. I like it.
Yeah, we'll catch you.
Where is your office, Sarah?
I work at a South Bend. I work at a really, really spectacular company that has a great technology, great standards, amazing training, and I'm a survey technician right now. And I just work for the best people, and I'm learning how to do all the best things. And we have all the coolest projects and get to work at all the coolest places. And we just do a lot of urban exploration and have a lot of fun. And it's just the best job ever. So
That's
Don't
awesome.
leave. It sounds like a good place.
Exactly. Exactly. Landon had a couple of his book suggestions on there. Landon, real quick about the Econ Talk. Is that a podcast one?
Oh yeah, that's a podcast.
Okay.
Yep, it's an economics podcast, but they talk about a lot of business stuff. So if you're a commuter, it's a cool podcast.
Okay. And then the land planning and development regulation law, is that kind of a nationwide book, or is that?
Yeah, nope,
Okay.
It's nationwide, and it's just a lot of surveyors I feel like don't know enough about the planning and zoning side of things, so it's a good book for that. Good introduction to that.
Okay. And then what's the Blue Orange strategy or Blue Ocean strategy?
Blue Ocean Strategy is just a business book. It's about figuring out how you're going to compete and kind of what your strategy is and what the trade-offs are. And if you own a business, it's a great book. I learned a lot.
Got it. Cool. That's awesome. Okay, I'll get all those wrap up email as well. So, last seconds. Anything? I think we're good. Awesome, guys.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Thanks, Landon. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.